begun?
Right, we're all good. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks very much indeed, Hannah. Thank you all for joining us tonight. This is the Planning Committee meeting of Froome Town Council. I'm Steve Tanner. I'll be chairing this evening's meeting. We want to make our meetings available to as many people as possible, regardless of where they are. So we use a hybrid setup here in person and online via Zoom. For those in the room, a little housekeeping, the emergency exit is to the rear corner of the room. The assembly point is in the car park. Toilets can be accessed at the end of the corridor on the right-hand side, and there is an accessible toilet to the right of the lift over there. We're not expecting any fire drills or anything tonight. For attendees on Zoom, please pose any questions to the Q&A board. Attendees' names will become visible on the questions board for the record as your question is answered. Attendees in the room, when the time comes, please raise your hand. Tonight, Jane and Catherine will clerk. Catherine will manage the questions board and the participant settings, and Hannah will take the minutes. The meeting will be recorded for minuting purposes, and we will be live streaming to our YouTube channel. I'll just quickly run through the people on the top table. So starting from, we have Chris and Jim from Selwood Parish Council, and Polly, who's a Froome Town Council, Polly Lamb, Fiona Barrows, Froome Town Councillor, Lisa Millard, Froome Town Councillor, Mark Dorrington, myself, Jane Llewellyn, Froome Town Council, Philip Campagna, and Andy Jones. The intention of this meeting is to listen and hear from the town, which will help shape our reply to the Selwood Garden Community proposal. Froome Town Council are a statutory consultee. We do not have any planning power, but we always comment and we always seek comment from the public on planning applications. We won't be making a decision tonight, it's just too complex. The Planning Committee will reconvene at some stage, prepare a response, which will be debated in full at a full council meeting, which will give all our councillors the opportunity and chance to have their say. This to say will either be a full council meeting or an extraordinary council meeting, a date to be agreed and advised. We'll go through the running order shortly. It's up on the screen behind me. But the intention is to hear from as many members of the public as we can in the time frame we have. We've invited some key groups within the town and those who are adjacent to the area. However, to achieve this, we really would need and ask your cooperation on a few things. Firstly, please stick to the time that we've given for the presenters. We're not restricting people to time as such, but if we don't stick to the time, then it affects the questions afterwards. For presenters, it's 10 minutes. For those who've registered to speak, we're requesting 5 minutes for comments, or if you have questions, we'll try and keep that to 5 minutes as well. We have participants online, and quite a lot of them, because this room is sold out. The only way they can follow the events in the room is if one person speaks at a time and into a microphone. If there's lots of talking, shouting, side conversations, it just creates white noise and the people online basically cannot participate. We would then keep the process to a question and answer. We know there are some really heavy and involved topics on this, but if the answer is long and seeks clarification, we can ask the relevant party to prepare a reply, which will then forward via email and on our website, and details of which are on the screen. I think everyone here is registered, so we do have your email addresses, so you'll all be part of that group that gets any replies that are sent out. We have seen and read all the comments on the Mendip website. We've also read and seen all the comments from the statutory consultees, and where questions are sent to us, we will forward them on. There are many topics to cover. We don't want to concentrate on just one item. Therefore, I may ask that we move on one particular issue if I feel it's taking up too much time, so we can cover other things. We're only discussing Selwood Garden Community tonight, not any other proposed developments or anyone thinks the development should take place. We do want to keep it focused. As you may be aware, bulk of this application actually falls within the parish of Selwood, and Jim and Chris from Selwood Parish Council, as I said, who will be making some comments tonight as well. Colleagues from District Unity Councils, thanks for your presence, but I do hope you understand we actually really want to hear from the public here tonight. If time permits, we'll gladly hear questions from you as well at the end of the meeting. If we don't get a chance to answer all the questions, please use the cards that have been distributed. We will seek answers or clarifications to any questions that are put on the cards, and again, posted on a website and send emails to the group as well. Likewise, questions posted online will be answered accordingly. Finally, we do want to ensure this meeting is conducted in safe and open space for all. We fully appreciate there's going to be difference of opinion on a few things, but we must ask and insist that all communications are conducted with respect to others and their feelings. We want everyone to feel that their point of view has been listened to, irrespective of whether you agree or not. Thanks very much. Pass over to Jane now. No, actually, no, we have to do some technical things just because it's an official planning meeting. So firstly, I'm going to ask questions, comment, information not relating to the agenda item from the public and councillors. Anything? No, great, can move on from there. Agreeing apologies of absence. We're all here, so there's no apologies of absence. And declaration of any members' interests. There are no members' interests. Right.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, can I just check if the cards that Steve referred to have actually been distributed?
They're on the table.
Oh, they're on the table over there. Okay, so if anybody's got any questions, please fill in the cards on the table, that questions that we aren't able to get to, that is. So just to start off, typical is not working now. There we go. So I don't really know why I'm showing everybody this, because clearly you all know where Selwood Garden community is, but we thought we would just show you the area in relation to the wider and surrounding Frome area. As you can see, this is the area in red here, and the other colours actually represent planning applications that have either recently had consent, are awaiting determination, with the exception of the Marston Lane application, which is here, which has been refused but is at appeal. So that's just to give you an idea of development around the town. And then secondly, I was asked to put together just some very brief facts for you. So current number of residents, according to the 2021 census, 28,559. And the total number of houses, which I've calculated from the last census data, sorry, the 2011 census data, and then the data published by Mendip of housing completions up until the 1st of April this year. So that takes us up to 12,350. And in the last 16 years, so the local plan period, we've had 402 affordable dwellings built, which averages out over 25 affordable dwellings per annum. And that is the data that is available, again, published by Mendip until the 1st of April this year. And that data also confirms that there are another 94 affordable homes that have planning permission but are not yet built. And that's all I wanted to say at this stage. And
Matthew, so first present. Yep.
Thank you, but I think we'll try and keep the presentation a bit more concise than anticipated, because obviously I think everyone's focused on Q&A at the end. So we will try. It sort of assumes a level of understanding of the site to a certain extent, but at the end, if people have any queries, obviously if we scoot through certain bits of the detail, please let us know. Sorry, a bit of a delay. So there, as an overview, it's 1,700 homes proposed and also 6.7 hectares of employment land, and that is anticipated to deliver between 400 and 500 jobs on site. There's also many thousands of jobs in the construction industry will be provided. It's also got a community centre which provides a primary school, local shop, restaurants, cafe, takeaways, community space, etc. So that's meant to be a small local centre for everyday shopping, but not to compete with the town centre. One of the key issues in Frome, as everyone I'm sure will be aware, is affordable housing. So over the last 10 years, the overall housing requirement has risen, as shown in this slide. And also house prices are nearly 11 times the average, which is one of the most unaffordable parts of England and the UK as a whole. A new local plan for One Somerset is coming forward. So the allocations that were anticipated as part of a plan review are now delayed for many, many years. And the latest housing register for Frome identifies 595 families or households in need of affordable housing. And that's in Frome specifically. There's actually 2,100 in Mendip as a whole. So SGC, one of its big advantages is it delivers affordable housing in a phased way and also a significant number. So 510, and that breaks down to 408 as social rent, which is usually the most acutely needed, with the residual being what's known as intermediate housing, which is basically you buy a proportion or low cost purchase. So I'll just hand over to the project architects to describe briefly the scheme.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. I'm Andrew Simpson from MVB Architects. We're the architects and master planners for the proposals. So this was the scheme as originally submitted back in 2021. It consisted of two parts, the main part, and then the solar application between the two railway lines. It's outline application with detailed for access points, one from Marston Lane, one from the bottom of the bypass, bottom of Ski Jump Hill, one off of Blatchbridge Road, opposite Cross Keys, and the final one from the end of Little Keyford Lane. It's predominantly housing, as Matthew suggested, with community hub at the bottom of the site, and then commercial land on the southern side of the river and on the southern side of the bypass, where it has good access to the main road network. So that went through all the consultees, and we had lots of feedback on those proposals. And then this was the amended submission in July, August of this year. So as you'll be aware, the solar park was removed, and then there was some fairly major changes to the application. So those included, in response to landscape character concerns, we've removed the commercial land south of the bypass, that close to Titherington. We've pulled development back from the ridge line, so along below Little Keyford Lane, and increased the width of biodiversity routes through the site. In response to wildlife and ecology, we've introduced a nature reserve south of the bypass. We've included a new all-weather sports pitch down close to the primary school at the bottom end of the site, and increased contributions to off-site sports provision in the town. And response to flood management concerns, we've increased the offset from the river corridor. That's beyond the minimum required by the EA. And perhaps the most significant change, which Neil will talk about in a moment, is the change of the access from Little Keyford Lane, which is no longer a through route. General through route is now a bus gate for buses and non-motorised transport only. It's probably my summary.
So the key aims for the development from day one, 4 years ago, really was to basically produce a new type of development that's not been seen in this sort of part of Somerset. So where cars are really the second-class citizens. So the image you see to the right there shows the dotted lines, which are actually roads that there will be no car traffic on. So they are purely for cyclists and pedestrians. So as part of a design review process, we looked radically at trying to eliminate car usage within the site and maximise sustainable links to the rest of the town. Also, an element of achieving that is what's known as internalisation, by having the on-site facilities, on-site jobs, on-site community facilities, the school, the daily shop, etc. Also, probably everyone's aware of biodiversity net gain. That's an emerging policy, and it's meant that 10% net gain has to be demonstrated. That's yet to come in. That's the end of next year, but we embrace that from day one. So we are currently planning to produce net gain well in excess of policy requirements. Also, energy efficiency and renewable energy has always been high up on our agenda. We originally proposed the solar park, which would have made the whole development positive in terms of its energy requirements. But obviously we withdrew that due to concerns, but we are now focusing on how we can maximize energy efficiency and renewable generation within the site itself. And surface water infrastructure as well. On a site such as this, you can do that much more successfully than just the sort of sterile ponds that you see on other developments in the area. So we produced a series of cascading wetlands, which can be biodiverse and just generally a bit better than what you would see on the recent sort of Edmund Parks developments, for example. So I'll race through this, but essentially biodiversity, 50% of the site will be green space. When you take into account that a conservative estimate of the parcels themselves, 20% of those will be gardens. I'll just pass over to Neil to describe the travel measures.
Thank you. Yeah, my name's Neil Brandt. I'm a transport planner and highway engineer here in Frome. I've been involved in this scheme now for probably approaching 6 years. So from the outset, we've really strived to make this something other than a car-dependent scheme. It is very much focused on active travel and sustainable travel. And as Matthew has already touched upon in terms of the play streets and the traffic-free streets, if we then extend that in terms of cycleways, footways, green space, we actually end up with a ratio probably somewhere more in the region of, for every 100 meters of trafficked road, we've probably got 500-600 meters of non-trafficked footways, cycleways, play streets. So we very much believe that we are setting a new way of doing things here in Frome in terms of the active travel. But that's internal to the site. It's also about linking the site to be part of the wider Frome community, getting that connectivity to the town, to the schools, to the shops, to the employment, so that people can make that choice. They can decide that they can walk, they can cycle, they can use the bus service to get to key destinations across the town. So from the outset, we've really strived to achieve that. Our investment in active travel is very significant. As you can see there, we're talking about somewhere in the region of £1.4 million in active travel provision. All this will be secured through a legally binding travel plan, which will run for the life or the first 18 years life of the scheme. So as it develops, evolves and matures, that travel plan will be managed probably by Frome Town Council, who will be paid to do so by the developer. And it will be there, and where objectives are not met in terms of, there will be annual surveys and monitoring. If things aren't met, then you go in and you intervene, and there's a fund of money there to actually go in and make good in terms of where you fall short. So it's a long-term plan. It's an 18-year plan to deliver that. In terms of sustainable travel, particularly public transport, we're all aware that bus services are really struggling at the moment in terms of viability, being able to get drivers to actually drive the buses. So here is the opportunity to invest in public transport, to actually look at our existing provision, and particularly the number 30 town service, to look at that and extend it, get it to go to the further places we want it to go, to actually go into the health centre, to actually go up to college and the sports centre, to go to the station as a transport hub. And through the investment and funding from this scheme, we will see that extension. We'll also see the extension in terms of it going from a half-hourly service to every 20 minutes. So again, it's all part of encouraging people to use sustainable travel, giving them the options, so it isn't car dependent. And finally, clearly, this is a significant scheme for the town. And quite rightly, we've looked very comprehensively at the traffic impacts. And in terms of Mendip, it's no doubt the most comprehensive traffic analysis and modelling that's ever been undertaken in the district, and probably somewhat unique in this part of Somerset. That's been very comprehensive. It's gone through a 4-year scoping and assessment and surveys. We're now in a position where we've got agreement with the County Highway Authority in terms of all that work, and their opinion that there will be no severe residual impact in terms of that traffic.
Just mindful of the time, we'll scoot you through some of these. So as I mentioned earlier, the solar farm, unfortunately, is no longer a proposal. So we're looking at reconfiguring the site. So currently we're looking at a binding requirement of a minimum of 20% on-site renewable energy to be generated on site, and a 75% reduction in CO2 emissions in terms of the constructions of the dwellings. The requirement nationally is 33%, so we're committing to over double what's required, and reviewing at the moment what we can do on site. We're happy to work with councillors to see if we can elevate the on-site renewable energy from maybe 20 to 30%. Previously, we've had discussions with Freeco, who are a not-for-profit group in Frome, regarding the solar park, and I still think there is a role for them to be playing in the delivery of the commercial units, because commercial units have very, very large roofscapes. They could be providing significant amounts of solar power. So how will SGC be different? I firmly believe it will be different from what development that you've seen in the town over the last 10 years, because comprehensive development as a whole has the benefit of phasing infrastructure properly. It's not just piecemeal. So even if developers of other smaller sites say they will pay for infrastructure, that just goes into a pot and it doesn't necessarily pay for the whole delivery. So we've got a huge amount of different proposals. So we've got balanced delivery of housing for 15 years, and that will be also affordable housing on a year-on-year basis. Extended bus service, which we briefly touched upon, and other sustainable transport measures such as a e-mobility scheme, so that could be scooters or bikes, additional cycle stands throughout the town and within the scheme, and a number of highway improvements. For example, the A36 junctions need improvement, and individual applications are not looking at how that will be solved. As you can see from these images, the streets are designed in an innovative way. We are trying to give them new life, so they're not dominated by the car. And the way we've laid out the development in terms of having sort of front gardens are very limited, means that you have much more generous back gardens. So we haven't scrimped on that whatsoever. And one issue that everyone mentions is, well, you say these things, but they won't happen. So I just wanted to run through how the design quality that we set out now is carried forward and not diluted. So at the moment, the application, as Andrew mentioned, just applies for detail of the access, but there are also a set of what's known as parameter plans. So they restrict height. So for example, certain parts of the site, you can only build 2-story houses, other areas 3, but that is binding. You cannot move away from that. But in addition, and that's the parameter plan approach is common, what isn't common is what's known as a design principles framework. So we've prepared that, and I think it's unique in this part of the Southwest. So essentially that would be legally binding again and linked to any permission. And it's an interim document that sets out what later design coding needs to deliver in terms of the quality of the development. In addition, we've got a Section 106 legally binding agreement that cannot be diluted. So it secures things like the monies towards infrastructure, of which there's £27.5 million proposed here, and also the delivery of affordable. Also, the LVA's contracts with future developers will require compliance with these documents. They will not, it's not in their interests to sell to someone who does not comply with it. Just very briefly, these are the parameter plans. We can share the today's proposals with everyone separately as a PDF just to save time and allow more Q&A later. So that's density, that's land use that controls and binds what land use can happen where. For example, you can't just decide you're going to put commercial next to existing houses. They have to go where they're defined. Heights again, so that sets maximum height. So certain more exposed parts of the site are restricted to 2-story, for example. And green infrastructure. So this is quite an important plan because this shows how you will bind a lot of the parklands and back corridors, all sorts of ecological mitigation. And this is just extracts of the various documentation, so I won't spend any time going through that. Obviously, we've had some objections. I won't go through too much detail. This lists the objections received over the course of the application. So, for example, there was someone at one point said there was no educational facilities, but there are actually over £20 million towards education and the delivery of a new school. There's no medical facilities was another allegation, but actually there's a dentist in the local centre, and we're providing 1.8 million, I believe, towards NHS care. And also things like where there's no commitment to ecological benefit, but that will be bound into any permission in terms of the biodiversity net gain element that I just discussed. So I think there are considerable benefits to the town. So as always, it's comprehensive development or it's sort of smaller sites, which is sometimes a rational proposal. But I think in this case, a holistic scheme that delivers all this infrastructure up front, pays for it and phases it, is far more logical compared to individual applications such as the Gleeson application that you've seen recently that's going to appeal. I won't take any more time as I think everyone's waiting for Q&A.
Thank you, Matthew. We're going to hear all the presentations first and then do the Q&A. I think that's the best way to do it. Otherwise, we can end up getting bogged down. So, Pat, on behalf of the Frome Civic Society, thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, please do.
Do you want the click? Do you want the clicker? Just the button on the right.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Really close. Oh, yeah, okay. Firstly, I will just make the point, the Civic Society is not a lobby group. We are independent, voluntary, and we are focused on what is best for Frome and not for any particular group within it. And I think that is important that you understand. We do try to get the facts as straight as we possibly can. SGC is a high impact scheme. It falls completely outside any local plan. It was proposed for Mendip's local plan part 2 allocations, and it failed with good reason to be included in those. So it has no democratic mandate. LVA's only planning argument is that we have no choice but to accept new housing proposals to make up Mendip's future shortfall. And this is not true. I must make the point that any application can and should be refused if the adverse impacts outweigh the public benefits. And this is the question we really need to ask. And the Civic Society has objected to this application, but only after weighing up the benefits and harms. Now, before I go any further, I will just add what we have seen so far and what we have seen before is a wonderful vision. But we must be aware when we're talking about vision and when we're talking about reality. So that's what I'm going to try to focus on now as quickly as I can. Right, let's look at the benefits. And I have not covered any of the benefits to the residents who will be living on this site, because those are not public benefits. They are benefits only to the people who live there. And therefore, they're not actually in the planning balance as such. The quantum of market homes is more than we need in Frome. We have plenty of market homes. We've had a lot of recent developments and a lot more on the way. And I have seen no evidence that we need more. And in fact, the more market homes we get, the more people come into town from more affluent areas, they push the prices up, and it can cause a circular problem. We obviously do need affordable homes. Now, no one's going to deny this. It's absolutely a genuine need. But we do have a significant number of developments coming online. A little bit of a discussion about exactly how many homes there will be and how many affordables will be produced. But it could be as much as 600 or 700 affordable units coming forward from what is in the pipeline now and what is projected to continue until the end of this decade. They might not all materialize. There are all sorts of problems. Now, SGC will not begin to deliver its first phase of homes much before the end of this decade. So it's not the solution to our urgent need for affordable homes. And the problem is this: if we commit to SGC, we lock ourselves into the maximum of only 500 more affordable units. The risk is that the developers, once they've bought the land off LVA, will produce their viability appraisals to plead that they can't afford the affordables. There is an extreme case in Trowbridge at the moment where the original 30% has been brought down to 8% through viability assessments. So we think there must be a more reliable way to ensure a continuing flow of affordable units after the end of this decade, which is the time span we are talking about. Employment space is vital, but it is relatively minimal, and I would say it is not guaranteed. That will only happen if the demand is there, and it will only happen, as indeed will all the other facilities that have been spoken about, the commercial hub, the care homes, etc., will only happen if somebody wants to run it. So it can't be promised to you by this promoter. Click on, right. Then we weigh up the harms. I think a lot of people will be, I think a lot of people will talk about landscape, biodiversity, amenity, the collateral damage when you obviously build over green space. So I won't talk about that. The things I particularly want to talk about are that intrinsically, we don't think this development is sustainable. And also, it has no governance framework. So it is essentially, despite all the so-called legal agreements, it is essentially without control. So it's not like a proper garden village where you would control the project all the way through. Now we can have the next one. Going back. Right. Those who have had an advanced copy of this will notice I have slightly changed this. Too much population growth is unsustainable. This chart, the green line essentially is historically how Frome has grown, about 1% per annum. This is population. The blue line is pretty much what will happen if we carry on with what's in the pipeline and then we revert to what we were before the sudden burst of activity we're having right now. The red lines are the alternatives that might happen if we have SGC. And the reason it's difficult to say is that the lower of those two red lines is what would happen if there was no more of the blue line. The only development we had in the next decade after this one was SGC. I think that's very unlikely. The line at the top, which is shooting up at an alarming rate, is what would happen if we had SGC on top of all the other developments that are in the pipeline and likely to continue throughout other parts of Frome. So essentially, I can't at the moment see, and neither can any of my colleagues, that Frome can really support that kind of population growth in the coming, say, starting in 15 years, let's say, that's going to happen. And you're going to look at potentially up to 45% growth over that 15 years. It isn't sustainable socially, and it isn't sustainable economically. The other problem that we have is that we don't have, and a lot of people dispute this, we don't have enough jobs in Frome to sustain more population. Now, SGC, as you know, is supplying some jobs if people want to run companies from there. That's a big if. But also, they may prefer to go to Commerce Park, for example. But also, the jobs won't match the population because the sort of people who will in general buy the open market housing will probably not be the sort of people who would work in the companies set up next to it. So there is a bit of an issue there. We can't agree that this is sustainable from a transport point of view. These are sorry, I've gone too far. Sorry, I'm back. Just a slide on out commuting. I put this one up because these are the 2011 figures. As you can see, in 2011, 8,700 people commuted by car from Frome. It's going to have got a lot worse because basically we've lost most of our employment sites, big ones, we've lost most of our big employers, and we've kept on building houses. So whatever one might say about percentages, in actual terms of what a culprit we are, we use our cars to work, and we are much worse because of our size than any other settlement in the Mendip area. Now, that's the one I wanted. We know that people don't like walking or cycling, especially if it's too far or the weather's bad or the streets don't feel good. And I think it is completely unrealistic for us to consider that these sort of mileages, and this is one-way mileages, right? And these sort of times for walking or cycling each way, particularly walking, I think even the young and fit would say, actually, that's a bit beyond what I'm comfortable with. If you're not young, you're not fit, or you're old, or you're frail, or you've got a pushchair or a buggy, or you're carrying shopping, then you've got a real concern about these kind of distances. We talk about public transport. Again, I have to say, nobody has the power at this stage to promise you enhanced public transport. They can put a bit of money in to make it better, but they can't make the services run. So you have to consider that as well, is what a risk that is. I'm going to speed on because I don't want to take up too much time, but we've talked about highways. Most of the money that goes with this projected development is spent on highways and not on local roads. There is a huge danger that Frome will become part of what we are calling the Wiltshire Ring City. It doesn't have a centre, but it's a ring that is connecting all these huge housing developments all over our neighbouring county. We don't think Frome should really want to join in with that. So we don't think you should make it easy to use your car from new developments. And we think it will be easy. Within the development itself, yep, lots of opportunities to walk and cycle. Go beyond the development and you are using your car. And I don't think that's what Frome stands for. Last point. We don't have confidence that this project will be delivered successfully. SGC is a concept, and we know that this concept is created for the purpose of enhancing and realizing land values. Now, the people who have been working on this have done a great job of making it look and feel wonderful. And I'm not going to deny that. But once consent is obtained, parcels will be sold off. They will go to the highest bidders. The project will pass into multiple hands, and there will be no overall governance. So this promoter-driven model is not fit for purpose, where long-term commitment is required. Right, Matthew's just mentioned the potential set of design principles which they feel might overcome this. This will not fill the void. This is a hurriedly created. It is an attempt, we believe, to convince the planners and this town council that it is okay for LVA to wash its hands of its project at the first possible opportunity. This document, and we accept this isn't the final document, this is the proposal for the document, contains no hard metrics, nothing that would enable anyone in the future to know what the criteria really were in hard terms, and above all, how they would measure those criteria. And this is a huge risk because if the vision falls apart and if there is no continuity, what do we end up with? Okay. Right. See where we've ended up. And you can see where I put what we think as a civic society, trying to be as independent as possible, where we think the balance falls. We do think that that balance falls for refusal, because why would you take that risk of all that harm and potential harm just to try to get some homes, market homes we don't need, some affordable homes we do but won't be coming along for nearly 10 years, and a bit of employment space that might not happen at all. So this is what we're looking at, and this is why we are saying we believe it should be refused. I won't go through these because my time is up, but we have thought about ways of mitigating. We will publish an updated version of this and we will circulate it for anybody who's interested.
Thank you very much, Pat. Thank you. Joe from the Friends of Little Keyford, I think, is next. Evening, Joe.
Oh, I've got them in the wrong order.
All right, hopefully everyone can hear me.
They can. Sorry, I had the slides in the wrong order.
Oh no, well now you're going to
This
throw
is your
me.
slide.
Unlike Pat, I'm not independent. My name's Joe and I'm here tonight representing Friends of Little Keyford, or Focus to those of you who know us already. We're a local community group that's concerned by the tarmacking over of one of the best loved and probably most underappreciated parts of Frome. Going to skip on. We're already seeing this on the fields at Sandys Hill Lane, at the ironically named Keyford Meadows, with almost 200 houses being built on local fields. And it looks set to continue off Little Keyford Lane with the building of another 319 homes across 3 fields, and they're all subject to planning permission at the moment. So that's more than 500 homes already in this area of our relatively small town. So can you imagine what that would look like in the part of town that you live in? As folk, we know the area quite well and the community that lives there. And as you can probably imagine, we're not in favour of Selwood Garden Village community, sorry, as it's now known. We weren't when it was first talked about 25 years ago, and we still aren't for it today. Quite simply, SGC is the wrong development in the wrong place. A rural area that's home to animals and loved by ramblers, runners, cyclists, horse riders, dog walkers. You know, this is, you know, the thoroughfare of Little Keyford. It's a lane. And SGC will just cause unmitigated environmental harm. I mean, we heard about this sort of, you know, net gain and all this kind of stuff. I mean, what we're talking about is ripping up fields and building on top of them. Destroying vast swathes of quality agricultural land. No one seems to talk about that too much. Long-standing hedgerows that are habitats to local wildlife and places that, you know, people from around Frome just come to enjoy. It will add to the overdevelopment of Frome, something that was already being touched on, particularly this side of Frome, which ironically, in Mendip's own evidence base for the local plan, has deemed completely inappropriate. And once these fields are gone, they're gone forever. No one's going to put them back. The proposers here today have said, you know, they're responding to housing need, but you know what they can't say is that they're responding to market prices to drive profit. You know, housing need is determined by Mendip Council under the local plan, and it shouldn't be forced upon towns like Frome by land speculators like LVA. In fact, it's almost unheard of for a proposed development on this scale not to go through the local plan process. So let's talk about the other contentious issue. You know, the proposers are promising more affordable homes, but as has already been touched on by Pat, you know, they won't say when because they can't. And that's because they won't be here when it comes to build them. The people here today are not house builders. They're the people proposing a potential development, which for the meantime is just a huge road system and not much else. And they're backed by land financiers with a big idea, a very big idea. We saw already from the slides before, you're talking about an area twice the size of Bruton. But with a huge mega site proposal like this, we as Frome residents and our elected officials have to look beyond these pretty pictures that Pat also talked about and the grand promises to sort of see the true scale of what's being proposed here. We need our councillors and the people who work with them at the town, district and county levels to do what they're supposed to do and scrutinise all aspects of a proposal as huge as this that's going to have long-standing impact on the town and consider things beyond the timeframes that we've been talking about. And look, we could spend meetings like this debating things like the quantum of housing on the site, sizable and unwalkable distances, the monetary contributions to Somerset, whether it's adequate Section 106 figures. Is there a need for an environmental impact assessment, the long-term BAT and ecological surveys, highways modelling that's realistic, out commuting and new infrastructure, right? We could go on and on and on, right? But very few of us have got a degree in town planning. And we're not in charge, tragically, of our lapse planning policy for the area. So even if Frome Town Council is just a statutory consultee and not a decision maker, we can still talk about the realities for the town. So some might be in favour of SGC because of the proposals made and the pictures presented by the land financiers and their surrogates in meetings like this. People might be swayed by the promised, and I do emphasise the word promised, social rented accommodation. But we should also expect our elected officials to look at this kind of proposal independently and with due process. And I say this from experience. The battles that Focus fought over the developments have been won and lost in relation to planning, the planning process. It keeps getting thrown back in our face that we must talk within the planning process. And yet this is outside it. So let's use the planning process properly. The simple fact is that SGC is a speculative development that lies outside the local plan process. But if we are to debate it in forums like this, as the people who actually live in Frome, then let us ask and demand answers to some of the really fundamental questions. So, at a time when more targeted environmental legislation and a new county council is coming into effect, why is this particular development being pushed through now? What is the true housing need in Frome? And independent of this proposal or any other, what's the best way to address it? Would there be signed contracts in place really to deliver on all the new social rented homes or community spaces? What's to say this won't end up like just another Edmund Park? When LVA and the architects and the planners have moved on, how will the individual developers, that they leave us with, how will they be held to account if and when they fail to match what you've already seen on screen? We've touched on that briefly, but there are two sides to that story. Who would take on the stewardship of this town after LVA and the architects have moved on? That's really important. What level of environmental destruction or ecological cost are we willing to accept on the precious, irreplaceable green spaces of the edge of our town? And why, when we're pursuing initiatives like safer streets around our schools, are we in the same breath talking about adding another 2,000 cars and extra air pollution to our already congested roads? What can we see in these plans except for that fields will be destroyed and new roads will be built? And while we have a neighbourhood plan, why is it routinely ignored? But finally, and probably most importantly of all, who actually benefits from this development and on such a scale? What do the people of Frome actually get out of this? These are the kind of questions that Friends of Little Keyford want answers to every time we see a new version of the same old proposal for SGC. There are tons more meetings like this, we just don't have the time to address them all, but they do need addressing. And so I hope that people in this room here tonight agree, and more specifically that the Town Council who've called this meeting here today do too.
Thank you, Joe. Next, we have Frome Area Community Land Trust. Delia, good evening.
Good evening. Hi. So I'm a member of faculty, Frome Area Community Land Trust, and I'm here to talk with John about our the need for social housing in this area. We feel it's likely that there isn't a housing need here in Frome, but we think that it's definitely the case that there is a social housing crisis here in Frome. And I just wanted to take you through a few figures on that, and then John will talk a little bit about what we are thinking of doing. So yeah, so just nationally, I think it's interesting to see what's happened to social rented provision in the last 20 or 30 years. And this slide comes from the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities. And then also they produced this piece, which shows that actually Mendip is not the worst in terms of providing social homes. We're in the turquoise line where we're doing 4.1 to 8 over 1,000 homes. And as we know, as Jane said, that there have been 402 homes, social homes, built in Frome, and there's more in the pipeline. So there are some social homes coming this way. But if you're looking at the numbers of people who own and the numbers of people who rent, about 27.4% of people are renting in Mendip, and of those 11% are social rented. So there are quite high numbers of people. We've had some analysis of Home Finder Somerset applications, and this is from March 2022, where there were 778 households. And we've divided that into the gold band, and the circle at the top, the gold circle at the top, is the numbers of households who are on the gold band, and then the red section is the numbers of households who would like to live in BA11 or have reason to live in BA11. And then looking at the bottom bit, it's interesting to see the types of houses that people are requesting. And we can see that 44% are requesting 1 bed, 23 2 bed, 17 3 bed, and so on. So there's a high proportion of people who actually need small homes. And I think that's one of the things that we are concerned to point out, because often the bigger homes are being built and not the small homes that are required for people who are in housing need. I missed the silver. The silver band is similar, it seems to have disappeared. So I'm going on to the bronze band, 54% of those on Home Finder Somerset are wanting 1 bed homes. So we need smaller homes. People are asking for smaller homes generally. The bronze band, of course, is people who are adequately housed. They have no housing needs, but they may be lodging with family or have no independence, or are they in supported housing. And basically, it's very, very unlikely, I think, that they feel very unlikely that they are going to be housed. The next slide shows the number of applications in orange against the number of homes that have been let in this year or earlier this year. This is from this year. And some rather shocking data. The highest number of people who have bid for a property is 342. The average number is 92. I can't quite see what the middle section says. So we know there is a need for social housing. We know there are many people who are not able to live in this area, but who have good reason to live here. And so the important thing is to find the right place to build the right homes. And I'm going to hand over to John now.
Good evening. So just to put it in context, I haven't got the clicker, I think. We wanted to use this opportunity in part to just say a little about what we're about as an organisation. So there you see where we came from, as it were. Let me just get my sheet. So that just sets out, oh, first off, who's heard of Frome Area Community Land Trust? Good. And who's a member? Who's paid their pound? You, okay. There's a hint. There's a note for you to take home. So this just tells you where we've come from really and how it's set up and what we're about. So as you can see, our core aim is to provide social rented homes for local people. And we would do that in partnership with registered providers. So that just gives you the context of who we are. So next slide. So we're focused on local housing need, and Daphne has just outlined the very real evidence that there is a significant, if not crisis, around social housing need. And we can't underestimate that, the level of need that there is for Frome. And these are people who live in Frome, who have connections with Frome, want to maintain their local relationships, their support networks and their families. They want to stay in Frome. And I hear of stories of people having to forcibly be moved out of Frome because they can't find anywhere to live in terms of social housing. So this just sort of sets out what we're about. And I draw your attention to the influence over developers and registered providers and design. So part of our aspiration is to engage with all developers about any development that comes forward. So we can try and achieve what we think is best for Frome in terms of social housing and best for people who want to live there in terms of quality of design, energy efficiency, fit for the future. So that's our sort of brief, if you like, in terms of what we're trying to achieve. And we also we don't want bolt-on development. We want development which is part of something bigger and integrates with the existing communities and not as something that's isolated for whatever reason from the rest of the community. So, it's a good idea, Aaron. So what we're doing now, if you like, is, other than being here, of course, is we've done some research. Sorry, I haven't done it. Used to this. So we've done some research about land. We want to acquire land and build social housing. It would be solely social housing, working with the registered providers. So it could be ASTA, it could be Selwood Housing Association, any of the registered providers. And we want to, as I said earlier, we want to have a role in development-led sites, developer-led sites, because the reality is that most of the housing that comes forward, including social housing, will be from mainstream developers. So just to say that we were approached by grassroots planning as to potential involvement in the SGC scheme. And in response to that approach, we set out some principles on which we would actively engage in discussions, because we do want to actively engage. But there are principles, and I think it's called red lines, that we feel very strongly about and would not engage unless they were fulfilled. So we want to have those discussions, enabling us to play a role in the delivery of genuinely affordable housing within the proposed SGC scheme. And we've heard various things about the issues around that, but no, let's accept that it can offer some genuinely affordable, we hope, housing. But just to say what the principles are, we want full and meaningful involvement in the development of design codes, with a particular requirement that all socially rented homes will be built to passive house principles. So that's about energy efficiency, which is most relevant today. And we also want to acquire the freehold for all socially rented homes, ensuring that they remain as socially rented homes in perpetuity. One of the strengths of faculties is that if developers and housing associations liaise with us and work with us, and we become part of that development, those homes will stay in perpetuity forever as social homes. It's one of the strengths that we have, being in a VLT. Just say, we did receive an acknowledgement, but we've had no invitation for further discussions. And we will have to consider if that is on offer to consult our members about that. It's not necessarily a decision the board may make solely on its own. So I just want to read out, so this is going to be very brief, you might be pleased to hear, very brief outline. So this is our statement, our SGC position. So at a time of crisis in social housing, our core purpose is the provision of generally affordable homes for local people. Building homes of a standard which are fit for the future, high in density, in design quality, and energy efficient. We see faculty as a voice for social rented housing, and in collaboration with other organisations, we want to help make Frome a better place for everyone to live in. We are seeking and aspire to have active and meaningful discussions with housing developers, recognising that they have a crucial part to play in addressing this crisis and providing genuinely affordable homes. Let's not forget, we are talking homes. They're not units, they're homes. We recognise the potential opportunity SGC offers to provide a significant number of social homes. And you've heard tonight, there's even questions around that. So it won't be until the 6th year that we start to see affordable homes. And I personally would like to ask the question why that is. And it won't be until the end of the next decade that we will see the full number, if then. However, we are also very aware of the challenges their proposals present and the real pressures on the town's infrastructure, which will result if their proposals are accepted as currently represented. These challenges must be addressed. We do not see any dialogue based on the current proposals. I don't think that's our position. Hopefully it is. I've just said it. Through discussions, we believe we could see a development that meets our values and the needs of Frome and its community. But we have to have those discussions, as well as all the other discussions that need to take place with the residents of Frome. And I think we should applaud the fact that Frome Town Council have initiated this meeting tonight. I personally want to thank them for that. So, however, developers putting forward schemes that do not meet our values cannot expect us to support their schemes just because they can provide homes. A town is not simply its homes. All developments, in this case SGC, particularly in relation to its size, cannot just be bolted on to an existing community, but must provide the necessary health and education services, transport and road infrastructure, green spaces and employment opportunities that support strong, resilient communities, which we will need for the future. We need developments which are designed to enhance the well-being of residents and the needs of the community, the needs of the town. We want to see homes for all, but not at the expense of destruction of our environment and our town's identity and infrastructure. At the risk of repeating myself, not for the first time, we want to make Frome a better place for everyone to live in. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Next presentation from, I think, Lolly. Is
No, it's not,
Oh, it's not Lolly.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good evening. Some of the slides being shown contain a lot of data which will take more time to digest than we have available for the presentation this evening. Crack on then. It's clear enough why Frome is the focus of so much development. There are undeniable issues in the whole of Mendip with finding places to build. Phosphate mitigation is not a factor here, and we are the largest of the Mendip towns. However, there are already 15 sites currently with consent for planning in Frome alone, either with permission granted or construction. Sorry?
So can you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm Lynn from Stop SGC. Permission granted or construction already currently underway. These sites together could yield over 1,100 new homes. In recent years, we have had over 800 homes built on greenfield sites in Frome alone. So with all those figures in mind, it no longer seems to be a given that a build of SGC size and scale is necessary to meet the needs of our town. I always forgot the slides. Can you click a couple of times? Oh, sorry, everybody. I think we got onto slide 5 now, or rather rushed through that lot. Okay. Yeah, leveling up. Sorry, I got confused. The next one, please. Okay, we have a plan-based system in this country for a reason. It's to ensure positive, holistic and justified development of cities, towns and villages that is consistent with national policy and meets the projected needs of the whole community. To deviate from a plan that has been subject to rigorous consultation, multiple modifications and even judicial review is unprecedented, especially for a project of this magnitude, and especially where the additional provision would exceed the numbers required to meet demonstrable need. The local plan also has a number of sustainability tests for different development options, not in use here because this development is being bought outside of the process set out nationally. If permission is given, there will be no local plan policies in place to govern SGC's rollout. Next slide, please. Whatever workarounds are put in place if this build goes ahead, there will be more cars on the roads in and around Frome. That's just undeniably true. 1,700 homes, 1.24 cars on average per home, so approximately potentially 2,100 more cars that our road system has to deal with. This is a medieval town with pinch points and limited off-road parking, so that is not an insignificant number. There's already been an increase of 32.9% nationally in motor vehicle traffic, so we can reasonably expect those numbers to be higher. Next slide. SGC is being advertised as a sustainable build, and in the public consultation and all the promotional literature, there's been a great deal said about prioritising public transport, but there's a lot more in the way of traffic mitigation plans. Next slide. And car parking spaces have been a part of the master plan from the beginning, which would seem to suggest an understanding that increased car traffic will be an issue. There will be an undeniable cost to our environment if SGC goes ahead, both in the destruction of grade 3A arable land, natural wildlife habitats, and the increased emissions from 1,000+ more cars driving on roads that are already congested in some areas. That's before mentioning the CO2 that we're going to expend actually doing the building, transporting the materials, and there's also the matter of the houses themselves. Next slide. A recent study showed that as many as 94% of new build property owners reported structural defects with their homes. At a time when housing developers are reaping record profits, new housing developments are full of unhappy residents. So there's the potential of an added carbon cost several years down the line for retrofitting. Now, this might seem like making mountains out of molehills, but at this point in time, when we have declared a climate emergency, we shouldn't even be considering proposals that are the least bit ambiguous in that regard. The energy and sustainability strategy attached to this proposal, which is just as an advisory document at this stage, contains a fair amount of ambiguity. Councils have a duty to adhere to the government's and their own pledges to address the climate and ecological emergency. The CPRE has found that agricultural land is disappearing under housing developments at an alarming and increasing rate since 2010, and it is threatening Britain's food security, while many brownfield sites lie undeveloped, which could fulfill their housing need instead. We don't feel that there has been enough exploration of alternative sites. Next slide. This build is designed around cars. That is plainly apparent. The so-called master plan consists of an arterial road network and then all other matters reserved. It goes into great detail about road access, and a long list of alterations to surrounding trafficways and junctions in an effort to absorb the higher volume of traffic that will be generated by these new houses. There is an absence of detail regarding pedestrian and cycle provision or bus infrastructure. Unless it can be demonstrated that high quality public transport service frequencies can be in place from first occupation, and I think it goes without saying that the current level of provision within the town doesn't meet that standard, then this can hardly be called a sustainable build in terms of transport. Another big appeal of building within Frome is that we have a train station. However, there is no model within the SGC documents that suggests there will be a subsequent increase in train frequencies to cope with a proportionate increase in passenger numbers. There's also the issue of housing density. Based on promotional imagery, car parking is likely to take up most of the area behind homes, not gardens, and there is a lack of clarity and detail in the map when what is needed is an integrated model of walking, cycling, and bus routes. When you're designing a build for seamless access to the bypass in an area that isn't currently serviceable, you really have to question how sustainable it truly is. Next slide. The idea that's being touted is the future residents of this site are all going to get on electric scooters and travel into the town centre that way, but that just isn't reflected in people's behaviour as it stands. And we've evidenced that here, accompanying graphs on PPT. It would be remiss too to not raise the question of, do we have jobs in Frome for all these people that are going to come to live here? Do we have school places? Do we have capacity at the health centre, the dentist? Can our infrastructure withstand an influx of new residents? The type, size and placement of specific units is a matter reserved like almost everything. The majority of land use is going to be housing, and the only thing that is established at this stage are vehicle access points. It's recognised that leisure and amenity provision is going to be outsourced, and there isn't any indication of how these public amenities will be managed on an ongoing basis. This means a lack of clarity on who will be undertaking stewardship of this site and brings into question how we ensure a holistic approach that yields something at least a bit similar to what the illustrative images promote. We don't have a 2021 census data yet, so there are no up-to-date figures on local employment or commuting patterns in Frome. But the most recent data that we do have shows that 38% of residents both live and work in Frome. However, 2011 data shows that more than half of residents travelled out of Frome by car for work on a regular basis. Less than 1% used public transport. Next slide. Thank you. SGC is estimated to provide approximately 700 full-time jobs, with up to 500 more anticipated in service industries, i.e. restaurants, shops, etc. It's also going to bring in more working people than there are jobs to give them, exacerbating the problem of out-commuting and making what additional employment opportunities that may be offered numerically insufficient. Frome has only 115 job vacancies, so with our population of 28,000, we are all but fully employed. The new jobs SGC may create are mostly in care, hospitality or warehousing, thus they are mostly probably 20,000 a year jobs. Wages in Somerset are quite low and average 24,000. These will be below the average. These houses, based on current offers, will be in the region of 220,000 for a one bed, 300,000 for two, 400,000 for three, and 500,000 for a four bed. Even at 80%, these will not be affordable for local people. Therefore, it's likely the development will not only have the traffic from new residents, but also from the new workers commuting into Frome. So has this been factored into the traffic plans? If car travel is not to be the default, which it shouldn't be, then where is the holistic approach to looking at daily journeys to and from Trowbridge, Bath, Bristol, even Westbury and Warminster? The detail necessary is just not there. Next slide, please. The consultation with Wessex Water assures that there is sufficient capacity within the sewerage works to manage a potential increase in residents. And it's also reassuring to know that rising foul water drains can be effective if they are designed properly. However, surface water from new developments needs to be handled outside the drains network. So the runoff will cause more water to end up in the river unless the SUDs can slow it down. So it sounds like Wessex can cope, but can the river? The site still overlaps a floodplain, and we are all aware that flooding episodes are highly likely to increase anyway in the coming years. The proposed drainage system for SGC has been found wanting in the most fundamental aspects by the land drainage and project engineer, and I quote, "The strategy relies on two bunds associated with a central flow route to prevent flow reaching the development parcels. This approach is working against the natural flow pathways and watercourses on the site and is not the most sustainable solution to minimize flood risk to the proposed development. As far as we are aware, an updated response has not been published." Next slide. There remains a substantial level of public opposition to this project among the public. We'll hear from several groups tonight who have their own reasons to be against the development. There are 420 objections registered on the Mendip planning portal, people given reasons such as traffic, ecology, public amenity, and viability. Social housing is the carrot that's there to make SGC seem more appealing. SGC is being heralded as a one-shot opportunity to provide homes for vulnerable families in the Mendip area. But since this site is slated to be built over 10 to 15 years, the chances of 500 plus social rented flats becoming available before the decade is out are very slim. Taking the design principles framework document in conjunction with the phasing, it's likely the delivery of affordable homes, including social rented, is around 106 by possibly 2030, rising to 260 in 2036, and by 2040, 500. Neither LVA nor NVB or grassroots associates will ever be custodians of this site. When their work is done, they will walk off with the check and leave catalogue house builders to build in whatever fashion they like before building what they can get away with in terms of social housing. The key point is, whatever is promised, the promoters, the people who are behind it now, will not be there to see it through. This is a lot for Frome to contend with, for a war that may not even materialise. We'd be taking on a great deal of uncertainty and potential damage for something that may not even come to put a dent in the current waiting list. We hope the council considers everything we've set out, as well as the voices of other residents when they come to make their decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Now I think Jim or Chris, is it, who's going to, from Selwood Parish Council. Hello, Jim.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah. Selwood Parish Council. Yeah. I will keep my comments very brief because I think
thank you very much.
What we need to do is to hear from everybody here. But most of this development was almost wholly within the parish of Selwood. But I think the ramifications from this development, of course, it was going to be felt in Frome and, of course, some of the other surrounding parishes. So I'd like to say we as a parish council, we've engaged with Frome Town Council for some time on this application and hopefully come to a joint response eventually. So anyway, we'd like to thank Frome Town Council for the help they've given us, because they have all the resources that we lack as a very small parish council. So the areas that we've been looking at include housing, health, education, road infrastructure, water and sewage, green spaces, and nature reserves, and of course industrial sites. But I think what we do need to consider is how a development of this scale will affect the sort of the character and the ethos of Frome Town. So I don't know if Chris wants to fill in with anything else. So I think that I've kept it brief so that we can now hear from all the rest of you here.
Great, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. Thank you. Now we had some people who registered to say they wanted to speak, so we're going to go to those first. I'm trying to get through this as quickly as I can because we don't want to be all night. So the first registered speaker is Andy Palmer on behalf of the Frome Chamber of Commerce. Andy, thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Andy Palmer. I'm the president of Frome Chamber of Commerce. At present, the Chamber of Commerce doesn't actually have a position formally on the proposed Selwood Garden community development. Unfortunately, unlike the planning application and the planning process for the proposed Saxonvale development in the centre of town, we haven't actually been treated by the planning authority as a statutory consultee. This is something that I would like to put on record this evening that we are very, very disappointed with. And obviously that's directed at Mendip District Council rather than Frome Town Council. Like many individuals and groups within Frome, we do have concerns on the impact of the development on the town. However, putting a caveat on that, we do believe that there is a place for a well-planned mixed-use development, and the opportunities that that type of development can actually present, particularly for the members that we represent, namely the business community. Clearly, so first of all, I'll just talk briefly about our concerns. Clearly, although we're all residents of Frome, as an organisation representing the business community, our concerns must always focus on the business and economic needs of the town. We've seen the diagrams and we've seen the figures in terms of the number of housing units and then the commercial spaces that's being proposed. Clearly, when you look at those figures, 1,700 new homes, that could, given the trends on the way that people are living together these days, adult children living with parents for much longer, that could mean that there could be anything between 2, maybe 5,000 people living in those homes. Is 400 to 500 jobs really going to satisfy that area? We don't think so. Also, do we think that the employment space is going to be of the right type of employment space that we need in Frome? We're desperately crying out for more employment space within the town, and just having units such as are already on offer at Commerce Park is just, it's not acceptable. This links into the second concern over the connectivity of the site to the main town. There's a real danger that the development of these homes is going to further exacerbate the current and future problem of Frome becoming a dormitory town. We've seen the figures again of people that actually live in the town but actually commute out to work. And it's frightening in terms of what could actually happen in the future. Obviously, being so close to the bypass is almost an invitation for people to drive from Frome rather than stay in the town and head out to West Wiltshire and Bath and Bristol. So in terms of it, what is this going to add to the local business community? Not a lot in its current format. However, there are opportunities. As I've mentioned, the Chamber of Commerce isn't being treated as a statutory consultee. And if we were, we may have been able to contribute to the discussion over the types of employment land and commercial space being proposed very much earlier. Obviously, with us not being treated that way, we would still welcome engagement with the proposers so that they may actually understand the further needs of the local business community in the town. I'd just like to add to the employment space argument as well. Over the last 20 years, we've lost numerous former employment spaces to residential development. The list can go on. The former Butler and Tanner site, T&H White's, it's incredible the amount of jobs and employment space that has already been lost. So that said, a well-planned mixed-use development does offer the hope that speculative brownfield planning and brownfield development on former employment space may stop. We don't necessarily agree with some of the comments made about brownfield development, because the more you do that, the less employment space you have, and the more businesses, once they get to a certain size, do have to move out of Frome. So in conclusion, as I say, we have no formal position on this at present, rather just a list of thoughts, questions, and a lot of concerns. We would welcome the opportunity to engage more. But as I say, we're not a statutory consultee, so that means that we will need to do so in a more informal way. But ultimately, in its current format, this development doesn't feel, it doesn't feel right. A future mixed-use development of some size would be welcome, but whether this is it, I'm not so sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you. Thank you. Next, I have Peter McFadden. Is Peter here? No, great. Move on. sorry, Chris Lewis from the CPRE. Campaign Protection. Chris, can you just tell everyone what the acronym is for CPRE, please?
Well, like many acronyms, it used to be the Council to Protect Rural England, but we are now more interested in promoting, protecting, and we are a Somerset charity for the countryside. Basically, the acronym sort of vanishes as time goes on. Anyway, we are CPRE Somerset. There's the CPRE Wiltshire as well, and Frome is on the cusp of the two of them. My name is Chris Lewis. I'm a trustee of CPRE Somerset, and I used to be their chair when I was a bit younger, and I've been asked to make the following statement tonight. The beautiful landscape of the River Frome Valley, covered by the footprint of this scheme, is an extremely valuable asset to the town and should be protected. It represents the green lungs of the town and is crossed by ancient lanes, frequently used by walkers, riders, and cyclists. Far-reaching, magnificent views across the river valley will be lost forever if this scheme goes ahead, and large numbers of mature trees and hedges would be removed. There are heritage buildings in the landscape. Their entirely rural settings will be harmed, and their heritage significance will be diminished. The scheme itself is outside the future growth area set out in LPP1. That area was mapped in Core Policy 6 and lies south of the Mount and east of Blatchbridge Road. If it were to be approved before the local plan is reviewed, the scheme is large enough to preempt decisions on future spatial planning for the whole district, not just that of Frome. It should therefore be refused on the grounds of prematurity as well as landscape harm. It is just not appropriate for huge schemes of this sort to be tacked onto existing towns and given outline planning permission with conditions attached. The land will be parceled out and sold to the highest bidders, points that have been made by many previous speakers. If there really is identified housing need on this vast scale, and I have not seen that tonight, this need would be better achieved to have a fully planned new garden town in a standalone situation, jointly developed in conjunction with the new unitary authority along the lines, for those who know East Devon, of the development on Exeter Airport called Cranbrook. That, Chairman, is my comment.
Thank you very much. I have Summer Atty. Is she here? Hello. See, come up. Bring a microphone to you if you want.
Okay, is this good? Hello, I'm 23 and I've recently graduated from Central St Martin's where I studied my fine art degree. My artwork explores the loss of land to housing developments and how this impacts communities. Last week, I had my first solar exhibition here in Frome to give voice to the community on the issue of Selwood Garden community. I have written up notes made by those who attended for everyone to read, which I will hand out at the end. I have lived in Keyford with my mum for 20 years and we don't have a garden. This area of land became my garden and much more. It's where I exercise, it's where I walk my dog, and it's where I paddled in the river and played in the snow as a child. Most importantly, it's where I escaped from built up areas and human interaction. This became more important to me during COVID. The number one response I get to my artwork is, but we need more houses. I argue that we do not need more houses, but the UK has more empty homes than it does homeless. In the Southwest, we have the highest number of second homes, the top uses being holiday homes and investment properties. Building new houses is just a quick fix for a much bigger problem that will have huge consequences for the environment and the community. Author Katrina Davies states, if we keep building houses that cost the earth to protect the greedy from having to share, then our houses won't be worth the earth they're built on because the planet will be uninhabitable. We need this land now more than ever. We need it for our food security, we need it for exercise, and we need it for our mental health. As a young person, I feel I need to be brave and keep raising the uncomfortable truth that we cannot afford to keep covering our planet in concrete and tarmac. We need to address the unequitable access to our land. We have very few wealthy languishing on huge estates, while the vast majority are packed onto unhealthy urban environments, only able to freely roam on 8% of England's land. We do not need more houses, we need political change, and with that, equal distribution of houses that are already built. Stop protecting the greedy from having to share and protest for change, equality, and for our home, planet Earth.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, the next person registered was Ken McCall. Is Ken McCall here? Hello, good evening.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ken McCall, and I'm a local campaigner working like Chris with CPRE, the Campaign to Protect Rural England. My family has lived in Frome for many years. My granddaughter works here. I live just over the border in Wiltshire. But with Chris, we do have cross-boundary connections between Wiltshire and Somerset. So we don't just draw a boundary line just past Southwick. We do actually interact with CPRE Somerset. You will know that this is an exceptionally unpopular planning application. No doubt you have been on the Mendip Planning website, most of you, I hope. There you will see hundreds of objections. It's hard to count them all by hand, but if you search on the word object, all 474, that's 474 of them, are highlighted one by one. The search on the word support reveals only 5 letters of support. So we're talking about majorities, and I think that sort of speaks volumes. I'll say those figures again. 474 against 5 letters of support. Pretty well speaking for most of the people in Frome, I think, tonight, I hope. There's also, in addition to these figures I've just given you, there's a petition of 96 names objecting as well. So a further 96. We haven't done the complete exercise yet. We printed out many of the objections, and here they are. But just to give you some idea what we've been going through. Nearly taken up a ream of paper printing out this stuff. Okay, so what did the people say? Top of the list is the destruction of the countryside, of agricultural land, of habitat, of wildlife and amenity, and building the wrong way for a climate emergency. Then comes traffic. People are saying that with hundreds of houses already in the pipeline in the area of Frome, another 1,700 in the form of SGC would be madness. A very high number said that the SGC is too big for Frome and it would actually ruin the town. A lot of Fromies, I'm almost like an adopted Fromie, but a lot of Fromies don't believe that it won the best place to live in the UK. under severe threat of being ruined. That reputation is going to rapidly disappear if we're not careful. Another big concern was services, particularly medical services and dentists and schools. People want a walkable town, not a town with a dead centre and everything moved to the edge, which will look like everywhere else. Other towns have suffered because of that. So we get the donut effect of the dead town centre and everything moved to the perimeter. It just doesn't work. For those interested in the buzzword affordable housing, you will be interested to know that the 2,500 proposed south of Trowbridge promised 30% affordable homes. Now the developer says that it has to be between 8.8% and 11% to be sufficiently profitable, or viable as they call it. I'd rather use the word profitable, because obviously that's what developers are looking for, profit. There are many other ways to build affordable housing, and we've heard very good speeches. I think Joe certainly touched on it tonight. Other ways of doing affordable housing. CPRE have learned that the master plan for big housing development is merely a pleasant sketch. We know at CPRE how much the original concept changes after that magic moment for the developer when he gets outline planning permission. The other matters are reserved. And that means in normal language that the developer has the chance to change. This is something quite a lot of people don't really understand and not aware of. What about the poor developer in this case? Like everyone else proposing major developments of this size, they need to go through the system rather than trying to sneak around it. We've heard that before this evening, that there is a system in place and that needs to be adhered to throughout the UK, Frome being no exception. So finally, I can ask the Town Council, will the Town Council support their people and the planning system and suggest that the developer withdraws their application and proceeds instead through the local plan review process in the correct manner? Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ken. I'm going to keep it moving on. Richard Hammonds, is Richard Hammonds here? Excellent. Thanks, sir.
I'm a resident of Blatchbridge, sorry, a resident of Blatchbridge. This affects this is right on my doorstep, effectively. 3 points I'd like to make. Sorry.
So it's the people online, they can't hear you.
3 points I'd like to make. Is that better?
Thank you.
Firstly, this is definitely going to be a dormitory for commuters, and it amazes me that there's been no improvement for the A361, A362 junction, where there was a fatality within the last year. That interchange, if this development goes ahead, needs to be looked at. And I'm amazed that Somerset roads have not even spotted that. My other points are firstly on due diligence. LVA was established in 2013. They have 33 projects on their books. Excluding SGC, the average size of those projects is 66 houses. 8 have been approved. 4 forced through by appeals to the planning inspectorate. Of those, not one house has yet been built. Why on earth are we dealing with these people? This is a massive development. We should be dealing with the developers who've got the wherewithal to follow through on the promises made. Here we have promises made. LVA are not even the contracting party. The contracting party is Frome Keyford LVA Limited, which has got 2 controlling parties. One is Manual Investments Limited, which is owned by Mr. Tizard, who is the chair of LVA. And the other one is Rish Properties, which is an insolvent company owned by a Neha Shah, who doesn't appear on LinkedIn or any social media. So who is this person that we are putting our future in, our hands into? We have here within LVA, no project management expertise. This is an enormous development, far exceeding anything they've done before. Are we dealing with the right people here? The second thing is looking at the money. So interestingly, we have section 106 is, they talk on one slide at 23.4 million, on the final slide at 27 million. Perhaps it's somewhere in the middle. Clearly, they're not too sure themselves. But how is that money going to come? It's going to be spread across 15 years. Will the first developer put in a rising sewage main that's big enough for the whole site? Or are we constantly going to, are they going to commit to the community investments required up front? How's that money going to come in over 15 years? And also, section 106 is a sum defined in money. £900 last year costs 1,000 today, but with 10% inflation. How's that going to look over 15 years? The sums agreed could be paltry compared to what's actually required when the actual product is delivered. And I just do, I'd love to understand how the money is going to flow and how the commitments are going to be made. But I sincerely am very concerned that the commitments will be made by people who's not carrying them out. Development of this size should be with a developer, not with a company who hasn't delivered a single house in 9 years and has never experienced anything of this scale. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you. Two more. Right, quickly moving on. I have Matt Prosser, please. Well, apart from
Hello everyone, I'm a local resident. I live on the Mount. Before I even start, I was invited to sit in Circle recently, and one of the first things that they invited us to do was light the children's flame. I don't know if any of you have heard of that concept, but the idea is that before we make any decision about anything at all, we consider our seventh generation in the future and what it's going to mean to them. Now, at the current rate of climate change, are we even going to see a seventh generation? I'm not entirely sure of that, but our government have actually signed up to the climate emergency. What does that actually mean? You're talking about building 1,700 houses over 15 years. You're talking about, 75%, reduction in CO2. What does that really mean? I don't really know, but you're going to be using a huge amount of diesel to do it. Cement is in the top 5. Concrete is in the top 5 polluters on the planet. And we're talking about burning a huge amount of carbon right on our doorstep, not to mention bringing it in. So climate emergency, is it worth the paper it's printed on? What does that mean? Not only for your children, for their children, 7 generations in the future. It's not a concept that we think about very much in the UK, or certainly in the Western world, but the planet is screaming at us that we should. To do with the climate emergency, and so I noticed that you're talking now about putting solar panels on all the roofs and air source heat pumps. That's sort of fair enough. There's no talk about any form of water reclamation. We're a hugely wet county, but why aren't we? You reclaim all the water, store it underground, use it for your washing machines and all of that sort of extra stuff. Grey water reclaim. It's not even mentioned. I don't understand it. The gardens don't look as if they're particularly big enough. We need to be growing a lot more of our own food. And that's going to happen. That's going to happen because the price of everything's going up. People are going to need that space to do that sort of thing. So that was point number 1. I'll be super quick. So yeah, climate emergency. We can't be building that amount of houses. Second, affordability. If you're really interested in affordable housing, then why don't you build those 500 houses first? That should be the first thing that you do. You should come in, you should sort out the infrastructure, and then build those 500 houses and then see where you are after that. I think probably what's likely to happen, as in a lot of other cases, is that as time goes on, inflation goes up, you know, what's happening with the interest rates and stuff at the moment, the plan will go ahead and the developers will suddenly realize that actually there isn't enough profit to be made. So the 500 houses will turn into 300 houses, will turn into 100 houses, might turn into 5 rentals on the whole site. And it's very easy to get mugged off into that. You see it happen time and time again. Affordable housing. So about 23 to 24 grand is about the sort of average salary in this part of the world. So you take 2 people, if you're lucky enough to have 2 people, let's say you've got a household income of 50 grand. You then go to the bank and say, can we have 3 times our income, please? 150 grand. Yeah, sure, we'll loan you that. And we want 20 grand deposit. I don't know anyone that can just come up with 20 grand like that. So then you've got, if you're lucky, 150 to 170 grand. So these 500 houses are going to cost 170 grand. Brilliant. That's awesome. I doubt it. I don't see that that's likely at all. So I think the affordable housing isn't actually affordable for the majority of people that need it. The majority of people that need it are young people, and they're wanting 1-bedroom sort of properties, 2-bedroom properties tops. I just don't think affordable housing is worth the name, actually. That's point number 2. Finally, has anybody phoned the medical centre recently at 8 o'clock in the morning? Yeah, it's fun, isn't it? It's awesome. So, yeah, right. At 30 seconds past 8, I'm usually number 80 in the queue. I've got 2 young children, you know, and it's a nightmare. I appreciate your fairly sort of glib throwaway comment in the first briefing that there's medical, there's going to be a dental surgery in the hub, but is it going to be an NHS dentist? Probably not. And there's no talk about any other of that infrastructure. So we are talking about somewhere in the region of an extra 4,000 to 6,000 people coming into this space. All those houses aren't going to be used up by the people currently living in Frome. So we're going to go from whatever it was, 28,000 people up to sort of 32-ish, you know, give or take. We are going to have influx and our services aren't going to cope. And then you're going to give it off to developers, run away, and it won't be your problem. But you'll have made the money. So that's awesome. Education is also another thing. Yes, there's a thing on the plan for a first school, but what about the second and third school? There isn't anything about that. If anyone's tried to, have you guys tried to get up the butts at sort of 8:30 in the morning on the way? You know, it's just ridiculous. The whole thing doesn't work. So climate emergency shouldn't be done. Affordability, doubt it. No extra actual provision that means anything to the people already living here.
Thank you, Matt. I've got one more registered speaker, which is Sarah. Hurry up.
Be quick, I promise. I'm Councillor Sarah Butler, currently the Mayor of Frome, but I'm actually speaking tonight on behalf of Julian Height, local tree guru, historian of our very, very special ancient Selwood Forest. Unfortunately, he's working tonight giving a tree talk, so he's just asked me to speak very briefly on his behalf. And it's usually me telling everyone to keep it quick and shut up, so I'll do my very best to stick by my own rules. Just a couple of bits from Julian's report on the forest that he wrote in October 2020 when this development was first mooted. Looking across from the site, we see an historic landscape, once part of the ancient royal forest of Selwood. That forest played a vital role in the establishment and subsequent development of the town and is a significant part of Frome's rich history. Veteran trees endure in that landscape. Not only are they living links to our rich history, they act as havens for wildlife. We all know about the decline of Britain's biodiversity, as big a threat as climate change going into the future. Veteran trees provide habitat for birds, bryophytes, fungi, invertebrates, lichen, and mammals, and oak trees in particular, providing more habitat than any other native tree, supporting over 2,300 different species. 330 of those live nowhere else. Ash tree is also not far behind in the support for biodiversity. Veteran trees are biodiversity hotspots. The habitat they provide cannot be replicated with new plantings. There is no such thing as mitigating against this kind of habitat loss. That is just impossible. They're my words, not Bugsy's. Climate change is of grave importance, but the loss of biodiversity is equally devastating to our future. And notable and veteran trees can help provide habitat and establish wildlife corridors, linking disconnected habitats to support a wide range of creatures, and it's therefore imperative that they're protected. In the historic landscape that we can see, we now can recognise now declining oak-wood pasture landscape, open-grown trees amongst which cattle, sheep and deer grazed. The central part of the planned development site was once a medieval deer park, which would have consisted largely of wood pasture. And we can still see some surviving examples of this across the way at the Titherington site next door. Amongst those trees recorded, Julian has mapped, identified, named every single tree on that site. Of the 62 trees recorded, 3 of them are ancient, 36 are veteran and 23 are notable. What's also notable is that in the neighbourhood plan, National Planning Policy Framework, paragraph 175C1 states, when determining planning applications, local planning authorities should apply the following principles. Development resulting in the loss or deterioration of irreplaceable habitats such as ancient woodland and ancient or veteran trees should be refused unless there are wholly exceptional reasons. And the worst is yet to come. When this report was put out in October 2020, it was requested that TPO's tree protection orders were put on all of the trees. That hasn't happened. 2 of those veteran oaks have now been felled. So the damage is already starting to happen and there is not any agreement in place. So we need to press on and make sure we can get protection for those trees. That habitat, that environment is irreplaceable. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. What I suggest is we have a quick couple of minute break, let people stretch their legs who have been sitting down for 2 hours. Then I'm going to give LVA 10 minutes or so to reply to some of the questions there, and then we'll go to questions from the floor, if that's okay with everybody. So just a really quick 3